UPN, the United Paramount Network, was a heavily funded new channel that wanted to compete with the very successful Fox network and the newly formed WB. UPN launched on January 16, 1995 with a 2-hour pilot of Star Trek Voyager, their flagship show. Most everyone remembers Voyager largely due to it being a Star Trek show, and in my humble opinion, it was quite good. However, there were a slew of other shows they launched in that first year, with pretty much all of them being canceled. Here's 5 Year 1 UPN shows you may have either missed or forgotten about. Platypus Man. Platypus Man was a sitcom based on comedian Richard Jeni's HBO comedy special from 1992. Stand-up comedians turning their routines into shows was a pretty big thing back in the 90s, largely due to Seinfeld becoming one of the biggest shows on television. The concept for the show is introduced at the beginning of each episode.
Platypus, a small egg-laying mammal that attempts to mate frequently but spends most of its time alone. Man, an adult male human. Platypus Man, an adult male human that attempts to mate frequently but spends most of its time alone.
It revolved around Richard Jeni as Richard Jeni, although instead of being a stand-up comedian, he runs a cooking show for guys called Cooking with the Platypus Man. Each episode usually involved Jeni's relationships that often failed in a humorous fashion. In a way, it was similar to the HBO series Dream On, only without the classic TV clips and nudity. The show aired on January 23, 1995, right after the second episode of Star Trek Voyager. Since it was after 9 p.m., they were able to get away with more risque jokes due to the way the TV ratings were set up. That's why Fox aired shows like Flying Blind later in the evening.
You know, I'm really starting to delve into some emotionally charged issues.
Yeah, well, that's really the first step.
But more on that in another episode. While initially the ratings were promising since they had the Voyager lead-in, they went down week after week, and the show was canceled. The show lasted for one season with 13 episodes, with the final one airing on May 15, 1995. The show has never been released on DVD, although some of the episodes are available on YouTube. Pigsty. Pigsty was the second sitcom from UPN. It was placed right after Platypus Man. The show premiered on January 23, 1995. It was about 5 male roommates living in New York City. The friends were a bunch of goofballs, and each episode involved their various antics, which often had them hitting on their hot superintendent, played by Liz Vassy. All the guys were in New York for their own reasons, each one of them struggling. For example, one was a struggling writer, while another was a struggling musician. Meanwhile, the superintendent was a struggling actress. Randy the writer was in love with Tess, and often broke things in the apartment as a way to get her in there so he could hit on her. He was played by Brian McNamara, who played the older brother of Ethan Hawke in a personal favorite movie of mine, Mystery Date. Liz Vassy, who played Tess, was in the very underappreciated spoof, The Adventures of Captain Zoom in Outer Space. She also was Captain Liberty in the live-action version of The Tick. The show didn't take off, but the network did let all the episodes air, even though the ratings were low. Like Platypus Man, it had 13 episodes, and the last one aired on May 15, 1995. The show was fairly stupid, and used many of the usual sitcom cliches, but it was still a fun watch, and really encapsulated a lot of how it felt to be in your 20s in the 90s. It was like a version of Friends, only this focused more on the guys doing more relatable stupid things. Deadly Games. Deadly Games was about Dr. Gus Lloyd, a physicist and video game designer. He was working on a game where the villains were based on the people who made his real life miserable. His dad, his in-laws, his ex-wife's lawyer, and so on. There's an accident in his lab which causes all the bad guys in the game to come to life, with the leader being a combination of the devil and Gus's dad called the Jackal, played by Christopher Lloyd. Each episode focused on one of the villains, with their plot to rule the world, with the Jackal being the evil mastermind over the whole thing. Gus has to defeat them using the rules of the game they were based on, with each bad guy having a weakness that he has to exploit in order to beat them. Beyond the obvious star power of having Christopher Lloyd, the show also gained a lot of attention due to its involvement from Leonard Nimoy. He was an executive producer, creative consultant, and directed the pilot. The show premiered on September 5th, 1995. Despite having such a huge push behind the show, it was canceled before its first season was finished. The last episode they aired was number 12 on January 9th, 1996. The season finale went unaired. Deadly Games did get a DVD release back in 2018, and they included all 13 episodes. Unfortunately, it's now out of print and not even available on eBay. Nowhere Man. Nowhere Man's a sci-fi show about a photojournalist who has his entire life erased. His friends and even his wife don't recognize him. He believes this is a global conspiracy about a picture he took, and he goes on a mission to expose the bad guys and get his life back. The show premiered on August 28, 1995. It was critically praised when it was released, with TV Guide calling it the season's coolest hit. UPN had a lot of faith in the show, giving it a full 25-episode run. They even hired Mark Snow to compose the music for the show, which gave it an intentional X-Files feel. Aside from the X-Files, the show also took influence from shows like The Fugitive, The Prisoner, and movies like The Manchurian Candidate and North by Northwest. Bruce Greenwood was the main character, Thomas Vale, and he did an outstanding job in the role. It really was a unique and well-constructed show that just couldn't get the views it needed to survive. It did have a very loyal fan base, but unfortunately, it was a very tiny loyal fan base, and was overshadowed by the show it was hoping to court viewers from, The X-Files. The series was canceled after one season, with the final episode airing on May 20th, 1996. The full series got a DVD release in 2005, but it's out of print and ridiculously expensive. Legend. Legend was a sci-fi western that boasted two very popular actors from the time, Richard Dean Anderson from MacGyver and John Delancey, who was Q in Star Trek The Next Generation. Legend's about Ernest Pratt, played by Anderson. He's a drunk writer who created the very popular character Nicodemus Legend. His audience believes he's actually the character, and through a wild series of events, he ends up taking on the persona of his creation and travels through the West fighting crime and solving mysteries. He's joined by Janos Bartok, who is essentially a stand-in for Nikola Tesla. The show premiered on April 18, 1995. It was originally intended to be a TV movie, but the network liked the idea so much, they opted for turning it into a series. The show had all the right things going for it, but it seemed it just couldn't find its audience. A shame, really, because it felt like Hercules or Xena as a Western. It also had a Briscoe County Jr. vibe, but that was another show that also got canceled. The complete series is available on DVD and is dirt cheap. If you're interested, you should pick it up before it goes out of print. So that's another 5 shows. Nowhere Man's probably the best of these shows, but I have to admit, I have a major soft spot for Deadly Games. It's got Christopher Lloyd going ham as the villainous Jackal, and corny, bad mid-90s CGI. It's super entertaining, and I'm glad I was able to get the DVD. Much like when Fox launched, I enjoyed the first few years of UPN. They were trying to make some new and unique shows to stand out from the other networks. Even Voyager was different than the previous Star Trek shows. UPN plugged along for a little over a decade, but they ceased operations on September 15, 2006. UPN and the WB merged and became the CW, which has been much more successful and has outlived both of its predecessors. We're at a point now where new streaming platforms are popping up instead of new networks. The downside is, none of them are taking the risks that the old networks did. Instead of making a slew of unique smaller productions, they're busy buying up existing properties and trying to make their version of something that already exists. I'm not really interested in a new Addams Family, Lord of the Rings, Powerpuff Girls, or whatever else comes down the pipe. I am interested in a DVD release of Homeboys from Outer Space, though. Although I'm majorly in the minority on that one, I know.
This is the guy you're so afraid of?
No, but please, my dear, you only wrinkled the suit.
Says you.
I didn't want to drop this during the episode because I didn't want to bring everyone down. However, it's something that needs to be said. In a much bigger tragedy on March 10th, 2007, comedian Richard Jenny sadly took his own life. He had been battling with severe clinical depression. It's true that so many comedians are having their own inner turmoils, and some of the funniest people you know are constantly dealing with depression. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're suffering from depression, please get help. Even if you think that no one cares, I assure you, more people care than you realize. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Life is worth living.